All right. Hello and welcome to the Finding Proof podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tess Crawley, and I'm so excited to have you here today because, of course, today I have another guest on the show. Today we're talking to a New York therapist, licensed clinical social worker, COCKRELL. He's a bit of a disruptor in the field. We're going to be talking quite a bit about what that means in the work that he's done in the past and is going to be doing in the future, with some fantastic stories to share. Welcome, Clay. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
It's very exciting for me. I think you're actually my second official guest on the show. So I have lots of I would say bugs to iron out of my system. Clay and I were actually meant to meet last week, and we had a little bit of a hiccup with that. So, and that was, of course, my fault. But I'm glad to get you here finally. So, tell me a little bit about your practice. I know a little bit about what you do, and I know that you're quite well known for your walk and talk therapy. So, perhaps if we start talking a little bit about what you do and that journey that you've taken with your practice.
Absolutely. Well, I started a practice, just a traditional face-to-face practice. Wow, it's maybe 15 years ago, 12, 15 years. And it was, I was having difficulty seeing some of my clients because here in Manhattan, it can be difficult to get around. And I had this client on Wall Street that was having a hard time coming up and finding me. And so my wife came up with this idea of, why don't you go to him? And maybe you can walk around outside. And I thought, no, you can't do that. But the more I tried to explain why you couldn't do that, I couldn't. So we started to explore the option, and I offered it to this client, and he thought it was great. So we walked along the Hudson River for the session. And it was an amazing session. And the more we worked together, it just became apparent that this was something different and new. And so we met regularly. I started offering it to other clients to walk outside during your therapy session. And I called it Walk and Talk. And I got the domain name and started marketing it. And a reporter from the Wall Street Journal stumbled upon it and did a big article, which led to an appearance on Good Morning America. And then all of a sudden I had a practice, and it was going like gangbusters ever since. So what started out as kind of trying to meet a need became a legitimate approach. And more people around the world, I think, are learning that being outside in nature can enhance the therapy process. So, so I walk with clients in Central Park, and that's even when it's bad weather. I do have an office nearby that we could go to, but that's how all that started.
And for an Australian, not having yet been to New York, this idea of doing your therapy in Central Park is very. It's almost like the stereotypical New York thing. It's just so beautiful in my mind. I've got this lovely image of it. I hear what you're saying about the reasons why you can't do something. I've often had questions from other therapists. I do a lot of mentoring of other mental health professionals, and they're often asking the question, a client wants me to meet them in their workplace, or a client wants me to meet them at the local coffee shop. Ethically, I can't because X, Y, Z, and those fears around breaching confidentiality. The one thing I often come back to, and I'm sure you discovered this, most people aren't silly. They know that they're in a public space and they're going to be talking to you as if they're having a normal conversation. It's going to be very different to the kind of conversation they'd have within the four walls of the therapy room.
Right.
What do you find that's different about the type of conversations that you have, the depth that you can get to when you're walking? How does that pan out?
Well, I think that the great thing about New York in particular is nobody's paying any attention. We're all so self-consumed with ourselves that, celebrities can be walking right by and nobody really says anything. And I, over the years, have developed a way of monitoring who's near us. So it's a huge park, and we really stay in private, quiet areas, and I make sure that there's no one near us that can overhear. But to your question, I think that I think better on my feet. and I think a lot of people do. And walking can be a metaphor for moving forward in your life. And it normalizes the process. You're not going in to see the doctor, you know, and it can be more casual.
Yes,
And,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that idea that people are, you know, they're not like the bunny in the headlight, you know, they're not sitting in the room
Yes.
with the therapist, especially those early sessions. I imagine people feel that it's
Absolutely.
a bit more casual, a bit more relaxed and comfortable, and talking to
Absolutely.
perhaps a peer who happens to be a professional.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
helps, especially with
Okay, we've
men.
noticed
Sometimes
something similar actually in my practice. Sorry, keep going.
that's okay. There's a little bit of delay on the line, but that's
Yeah,
expected.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it happens. It helpful to men in particular. We sometimes we're not very good with eye contact, and so to be able to walk and you know, you're side by side and you're casually glancing to the side to make eye contact, but in general, you know, it helps, I think, to reduce some of the pressure and the tension in the session.
Yeah, yeah. Did you find when you started launching the walk and talk therapy, how did your peers feel about what you were doing? Did you get much pushback professionally, or did people really embrace the idea?
Absolutely. I have been called probably every name in the book, unethical, poor business practices. How can you do that? It seems like that the people who are drawn to our profession really treat it as this precious thing, and they don't want to think outside the box and do something different. So yeah, I had a lot of and I questioned, because when so many people are saying you can't do this, you should not do this, but then they couldn't back it up with why not. And then I found out that Freud actually walked with some of his clients. And after I discovered that, I'm like, well, you know, I'm not a psychoanalytic, but you know, if Freud can do it, I can do it.
It's a great fallback. If Freud can do it, I can. I love it.
That's
Fantastic.
that's right.
I think you're right though. I do think that there's I had a conversation recently with somebody where we were talking about the safety of the four walls of the consulting room. I mentioned that a minute ago, and there are a lot of members of our profession who don't feel safe outside those four walls of the consulting room. You're doing anything that's out of the ordinary with their therapy. We've got a lovely service here in Hobart that is run by a fellow, and it's called Beer and Bubs, and it's a support group for new fathers, and they meet in the pub, and they have a beer, and it's very much similar concept of getting into your normal environment and having a normal human conversation, but it's about an area that's, you know, that you're adjusting to, and it's slightly difficult for you. And
Absolutely.
nobody's you know, I don't think the sky's fallen in yet. Those blokes are having their talking about their babies, and all things are okay. So I think I before we started recording the show, I referred to you as being a bit of a disruptor, because of course walk and talk's not the only disruptive thing. You've had a podcast for a while, and you know, right in the early days of podcasting, I would say, in the relatively early days of podcasting. Now, you know, every man and his dog's got a podcast, myself included. So how did you get into podcasting? What brought that about for you?
Well, I wanted to promote a new thing that I had established, and that was the online counseling directory. So I got into online counseling over 5 years ago because my wife and I wanted to travel. And as a private practice owner, you know, if you're not seeing clients, you're not earning money. And so I wanted to be able to take my clients with me. And so I started seeing clients online, and I did everything incorrectly. I allowed myself to be imperfect. But I was able to see a lot of clients online. My wife and I went to Rome for 6 weeks, and I would work during the day, and then we would go out and see the sites in the evening and on the weekends. And it was wonderful. And I wanted to take what I had learned and teach other therapists how to do this correctly and ethically, because here in the US, we have something called the HIPAA law, which puts a lot of restrictions on technology and confidentiality. I was using Skype, and Skype is not compliant with that law. And there were things that I had learned that I thought that I could pass along. So I created this podcast to interview other therapists who were working online, and to interview creators of different platforms, different encrypted platforms, lawyers, ethicists, all around this topic of telemental health, or online counseling. And it's been really incredible. I've learned a lot by doing it. By just being the guy asking the questions, I kind of turned into an authority on it.
Yeah, and this is part of how I came. Well, this is how I came to know you, was through your podcast. In fact, my practice has been involved in telemental health for a little while now, and it was your podcast episode around why you must use Zoom instead of sorry, there's a bit of background noise. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here in Australia. My family has just emerged, so sorry about the noise.
That's okay.
But, we implemented Zoom as soon as I heard your podcast, because we have similar ethical guidelines and rules in Australia, and we obviously are relatively new to telemental health. I mean, you've been a bit of a groundbreaker doing it because it was convenient to you, and it was imperfect action, and it was fantastic. And I'm sure I'm going to have imperfect action put on my tombstone when I eventually find that one. But the whole idea of telemental health is fairly new in Australia. We've got, for about 10 years now, we've actually had government assistance for mental health services. So as a private clinician, you can offer a service, you charge a fee, and your client 9 times out of 10 is entitled to quite a large chunk of that fee back for their, as a rebate. And we've only in the last 12 months now had the same for telehealth. So people can, in rural and remote areas, you can understand, of course, Australia is very large
Yes.
distances between a lot of those internal towns. And we've been running a rural mental health program for a while now. And yes, and thank you, because your podcast really did help with getting my head around some of the questions I didn't need to ask, because I had your answers already. So the directory came out of your experience of setting up online mental health, and there's a story about a photograph of you that I'd love you to tell about your early days.
Yes. Well, so I bought the domain name. I'm real big on domain name, because I think it's really important that you choose a domain name that's going to encapsulate what you do, and that is going to be very friendly to Google and other search engines. So I bought the domain name onlinecounseling.com, and I just didn't know quite what to do with it. And a lot of people, let's say I was seeing a couple and the husband needed to find an online therapist, there really wasn't a way to find someone, a directory. So I worked with a web developer, and I said, I want to create a directory, a listing service for therapists who are working online. And so that people could go there and search with all sorts of different filters. Say that I want to meet with someone who is female, who specializes in depression, who works with adolescents, who has this kind of training and is located in, the UK or whatever. And then, all these people would come up. And so I would have therapists that I would curate and make sure that, I would check their license and their certification and make sure that they were actually trained. And they would pay a monthly or yearly fee to be listed on this directory. So I launched this. It took a lot of money to develop it and to promote it. And it began to build a little bit. And so we wanted to have an official launch. Here in the US, we have a national symposium, a conference for psychotherapists. And that year it was in Washington, D.C. And I said, well, I'm going to rent, they have a vendor hall. So all these people who, booksellers and accountants and people who are serving the private practice psychotherapists would put up a booth and sell their services. So I thought, well, I'm going to get a booth. And so we spent all this money to create a banner. My wife came down And we put it all about online counseling, how you can, for a small monthly fee, list your practice, and you'll be able to get clients all over the world, and we'll teach you how to do it. And so that's where this photo came from. My wife took a picture of me at the booth. But here's the thing that happened is, so all day long, the therapists are in different seminars. And so just before they opened up the vendor hall to the therapists, and we had done all our preparation, made it look really pretty. And the symposium that they were in was the dangers of online counseling. So all these hundreds of therapists had just been warned for a couple of hours, never do online counseling. This is a dangerous thing to do. And they open up the doors, and there I am with my smiling face and my little pamphlets that says onlinecounseling.com. So it was an interesting time.
What a challenge. Oh my goodness. You mentioned before, with the walk and talk being called everything under the sun, and here you are trailblazing and smack into a brick wall.
Yes.
It's interesting. I think, when I talk to business owners, that whole idea of being, you're walking 2 or 3 steps ahead of yourself all the time, because you've got a big vision. And it takes a lot of courage to walk that far ahead of yourself, let alone the rest of the pack. How did you bounce back from that? I mean, that would have been potentially crushing. I can see why that photo represents what I often refer to as a superhero moment in your profession, in your career.
Yeah, I've had wonderful support from my wife, and there's many times where I've gotten frightened and thought, I can't do this, and she would just say, "Why? You're not doing anything wrong. You're providing a service. This is the way the industry is going to be going. Those that move ahead of the curve are always going to have slings and arrows thrown at them." So it's just kind of goes with the territory. But she's been a wonderful support, and to bring me down to earth when I start thinking, "Oh, this is awful. This is terrible. I can't do this. Everybody's mad at me."
Yep. I think Gary Vaynerchuk tells a similar story about being at an event when he launched his online wine store way back in the days when the internet was still a baby. And someone had just spoken immediately before him about how stupid the idea was that you could sell anything on the internet. Gary knew better. History was on Gary's side, and history was clearly on your side too. I think that idea of being at the forefront of something, in Australia, use of social media is a fairly new thing for mental health professions, and there are a few mental health professionals who, like myself, have a bit of a social media profile, and every now and then we hit a little bit of an oil slick. Where we go skidding off the rails because somebody doesn't like what we're doing. And it is about keeping that big picture in mind. So the idea that you kept on trucking, kept swimming in your own lane. You've got an interest in theatre as well, though, don't you? You've got a very passionate interest in theatre from what I can gather from your social media activities. Yes. Tell me about that.
Well, it all comes back. Yeah, that's the passion, and I went to school and got 2 degrees, one in theater and one in psychotherapy, and wanted to come to New York and be an actor. And so that's how we came to New York. And, you don't make a lot of money in the theater. So I had a choice of, I could go be a bartender like all the other actors, or, oh, hey, I've got this degree here. I might be able to support myself doing this. And that's, from the walk and talk to the online therapy and the directory, it all comes back to support our passion. My wife and I started a theater company, and this, supports that dream.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. I mentioned to you when we were emailing each other about setting up this interview that have a similar history, and it fascinates me. I think when I studied, because I didn't go to university till I was 25, and when I studied psychology, I put very much the blinkers on, put myself in those safe four walls of the therapy room right from the moment I stepped into being a student of mental health. So I'm very, very envious of your ability to marry the two. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's all
what
about.
sort of theatre are you involved in? What sort of plays do you do?
Well, we do award-winning plays. We don't do musicals. We do plays that have been recently on Broadway, usually a small cast that speaks to some social issue. Our hope is to our audiences leave thinking of things in a different way, and that maybe they have more questions than answers. And that's the power of theater. And it all comes back to story. I mean, with psychotherapy, it's about a person's story. And with theater, it's telling a story. And it's a very primal, powerful thing in the human race is story. So there's a kind of a common theme in there.
And I love that common thread. That's actually quite, profound when you think about that element of storytelling and the history of storytelling, as Western culture and all cultures really, there's a common thread of storytelling and the use of storytelling to get people where they're going, get people thinking.
Yeah.
Good for you. I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
Whereabouts theatre? Whereabouts do you have a building where your theatre lives? Or?
Yeah, we're right across the river from Manhattan in Jersey City and in New Jersey. So it's about a 7-minute boat ride, train ride, but we're right next to Manhattan.
Oh, hopefully you've got something on when I'm in New York next year. That would be amazing to come and watch. Good fun.
I think we might.
Oh, I'll keep my fingers and toes crossed. So there's another thread though that runs through everything that we've just talked about, is that thread of doing something that's a little bit outside the traditional four walls of the stereotypical therapist. And I think when people think of the New York therapist, they think about someone a bit stuffy, they think about a leather couch, they think about weekly in-depth psychodynamic therapeutic sessions, and that's just not what you do.
Nope.
Do you find that others around you are picking up on the freedom that you've blazed a bit of a trail, which means you've been a little bit of a role model? Do you have others around you? Do you mentor others? Are there others that are following in similar footsteps to you, or are you still a little bit of a rule breaker?
I'm a little bit of a rule breaker. I think that there are more and more people, particularly young therapists, who are able to think outside the box. I think that our field is a little stale, is not the right word, but we certainly follow a template of this is how it needs to look like, especially in New York. This is kind of a bastion of psychotherapy and the psychoanalysis and that type of thing, that it needs to look a certain way. And we get really uncomfortable when things begin to change. And, I know therapists that don't have email, that don't have a website, that forget social media. And I'm going, how do you, and they're not being successful. And here's the thing is that with the advent of life coaching, and I think there's wonderful life coaches that I will refer people to when that is the service that they need, but they do not have the same restrictions and ethical guidelines and legal guidelines that psychotherapists do. And they are going to pass us by. People are going to begin using, because they're easier, they are innovating, they are using technology. And I think that our field has the potential to get passed by that field if we do not innovate and we do not play catch up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm actually aware of there's a psychologist in Australia I had a conversation with not long ago who was saying that she was considering letting go of her registration as a psychologist because it was holding her back. Not that she wanted to do things that were unethical, but because the restrictions were still stuck about 20 years behind the current technologies, and
Absolutely.
were holding her back significantly from how she wanted to grow. I don't know the end to that story. I don't know if she ended up doing that, but certainly those conversations are being had here as well on the other side of the world. Yeah. So Look, I really want to thank you for some of the threads that have really come through our conversation today. They really marry nicely with the themes that I often talk about. Taking imperfect action, is gold. I think so often we overthink things, and when we've got ideas, when we've got passions that we want to pursue, and we overthink, we need to just act. Me starting my podcast, I spent too long listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos on how to do a podcast. And when I realized I was actually spending too much time worrying about whether or not I should be sitting inside my wardrobe to record audio, I realized this is getting now. So imperfect action is a really nice theme today, but also
Yes.
pursuing your passion and bringing your passion into the work that you do. I think for many people who don't have that creative underbelly that you've got, and again, with my acting background, this is why I love social media. It taps into, for me, that history. So for people out there who are really wanting to marry their passion with their profession, it shouldn't be an insurmountable task, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today, Clay. I've really enjoyed our chat. I'm actually going to take you up on your offer to catch up when I'm in New York. I think we could have a follow-up chat and be a bit disruptive together.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so very, very much. Now I need to end the recording.